Resuming debate, the honourable member for Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I too look forward to 2019 in October, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, while I'm glad to rise today and lend my voice and the voice of my constituents to this debate, I'd be remiss if I didn't also register my frustration that the majority of members, my colleagues in this House, won't be able to even give any input on this piece of legislation because the government has again moved time allocation, effectively ending debate. Madam Speaker, here we go again with more broken promises. Over and over during the campaign, they railed against time allocation, they railed against omnibus bills, all of the promises they made out the window, Madam Speaker. This 800 pages of omnibus bill, it would take Canadians more time to read this legislation than we have been given to debate it. It's outrageous and it is undemocratic. But it's made even worse, Madam Speaker, because of the campaign promise of this government not to use omnibus bills. Madam Speaker, I'll be focusing most of my time on the lack of action this Liberal government has taken in order to improve Canada's competitiveness on the world stage. The imposition of a carbon tax, the spending spree, and the debt spiral this government is plunging Canada into, and the abysmal track record of the Liberals on keeping their promises to Canadians. Remember those promises, Madam Speaker? Maximum $10 billion deficit. Balancing the budget in 2019. Well, Madam Speaker, again, more broken promises. The Business Council of Canada, who represents all of the largest companies operating in Canada, wrote in their submission to the Finance Committee during their pre-budget consultations, quote, "In the Council's pre-budget submission, we asked the government to introduce a comprehensive strategy to improve competitiveness, diversify trade, and attract private sector investment. Only 1 in 7 CEOs surveyed by the Business Council expressed confidence in the competitiveness of Canada's business climate. 1 in 7. According to the survey, the tax and the regulatory burden, combined with concerns about the availability of talent, are the most important factors affecting company investment plans in Canada. Among other recommendations, we've called on the government to undertake a comprehensive review of Canada's tax system with the goal of strengthening the incentives for investment and growth. The need for a comprehensive review has only been intensified by the implementation of the U.S. Tax Cuts and Jobs Act." They go on to say, Madam Speaker, quote, "Effective January 1, 2018, the United States reduced its federal corporate income tax rate from 35% to 21% and allowed for full expensing of investments in machinery and equipment. The reform package also introduced new international tax rules that encourage multinationals to shift capital to the United States. These changes have given the United States a significant tax advantage over many advanced economies, but in particular Canada, given our country's proximity and the high level of dependence on the United States market. According to a study commissioned by PwC Canada on the implication of U.S. tax reform, failing to respond to these changes threatened 635,000 Canadian jobs. 635,000 Canadian jobs and $85 billion in GDP, end quote. The Liberals in their last budget and their most recent fall economic update do absolutely nothing to address the concerns outlined by the Business Council of Canada or Canada's lack of competitiveness on the world stage. Madam Speaker, the Liberals are just out of touch with Canada's business community. Our Conservative team has been on the ground from coast to coast to coast, talking with business owners, investors, and employees. Personally, I have visited Sault Ste. Marie, Belleville, Guelph, and throughout the Waterloo region. I was proud to host a roundtable with local business several months ago with the Shadow Minister for International Trade, the member for Niagara West. While the roundtable focused on the trade negotiations between Canada and the United States and the retaliatory tariffs, we also heard how the Liberal government isn't creating a healthy environment for small and medium-sized businesses to grow. One business from southwestern Ontario that participated in our roundtable shared that in 2009, during the global economic recession, they lost 800 employees. However, because of the policies of our Conservative government at the time, they were able to recoup their losses in just 8 months. Contrast that with today. They're looking at job losses of over 1,000, and as a result of slow economic growth. They're worried that this Liberal government is spending the cupboards bare so that when a recession hits, they won't be able to recoup like they did previously. According to Finance, we also heard that just as the Business Council of Canada outlined in their submission to the Finance Committee, that the competitive climate is causing many companies to move south of the border, and even worse, discouraging entrepreneurs from starting businesses here in Canada at all. Or for those already in operation, any foreseeable plans to expand have been put on hold. Companies that once felt they were supported and encouraged by the policies of the federal government just don't feel that same level of support anymore. That the government is raising taxes, has no plan to return the budget to balance, is making this climate of worry and concern much worse. And speaking of debt, Madam Speaker, in the first 3 years in government, the Prime Minister added $60 billion to the national debt and are even high national deficits. Deficits are even higher than expected and higher than what was promised in the 2015 election campaign. The Parliamentary Budget Officer projects deficits of $22.2 billion in 2018-19 and $21.4 billion in 2019-20. This is $4 billion higher than the government showed in the budget of 2018. Last year, Canada's net debt reached an all-time high of $670 billion, or for every Canadian family, $47,612. According to Finance, the budget will not return to balance until 2045. By then, racking up an additional $450 billion of debt. When the economy is strong and growing at 3%, a responsible government would pay down debt so that we have more fiscal room in case of a downturn. However, we see this government doing the exact opposite. In 2009, the Conservative government was able to take decisive action to support the Canadian economy, and yet returned to balance and a surplus by 2015. But with no plan or commitment to balance the budget, they have budgeted the cupboard bare, and it will be the next time when Canada is faced with a crisis, there will be nothing there. The cost of interest alone on our debt will increase from $23.9 billion in 2018, almost doubling to $39 billion in 2021-22. That's $39 billion is more than we spend on federal health care, the Canada Health Transfer. $36.1 billion. Think of what that money could do if we were to provide our veterans with the help they desperately need. We could properly invest in mental health care throughout Canada. Madam Speaker, we could provide palliative care to every community from coast to coast. Instead, it's going towards paying for this government's out-of-control spending. Lastly, the carbon tax, Madam Speaker. Speaking with the president of the Cambridge Chamber of Commerce following the Liberals' announcement of their forced carbon tax on Canadians, he had this to say, quote, "While I am a climate change believer, the senseless response by governments all over the world is simply put ridiculous. There should never be a cost to using less. It makes no sense. If less use is required, punitive measures are frankly the lazy man's way of reducing carbon emissions. It is completely counterproductive to take money out of circulation, hang on to it for a period of time, and then give only 90% of it back. At least that was the Prime Minister's promise on a news report I heard yesterday on 570 News. It insults the intelligence of every taxpayer like we need to be babysat." End of quote from the Chamber of Commerce. He went on to say, quote, "I am reminded of an old saying, tax is a fine for doing something good. A fine is a tax for doing something wrong. Carbon tax is a fine. Everyone will have to accept, and that is wrong, just wrong. Today, when business is burdened in every manner by government, it's time that it be recognized by all politicians that without business, there is nothing for anyone. We as a business need a path that clearly demonstrates our economy is first and foremost, so it can provide all the money that government needs to save the world." End of quote. Madam Speaker, it's clear that this government is far more interested in imposing its ideology on Canadians than it is to listening and working with Canadian business. Allow me to finish with this. According to a website that tracks the success of the government, after 1,119 days in government, This government has broken or completely ignored as many promises they made in the 2015 election campaign as they have kept. That gives Canadians much reason to worry, because a government who campaigns on one thing and does just exactly the opposite only increases Canadians' mistrust in our democratic institutions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? The honourable member.